Good afternoon, bird class. Welcome to the last class before spring break. I love what you guys have been doing with the fish today. Okay. So I want to do things in a slightly different order today. So I'm going to leave us on this screen for a bit. Feel free to continue coloring. And I want to talk about the video we watched on parrots. What did you guys think? Mary, go ahead.
I thought, I thought a lot of things, but one of the things that really sticks out to me was trying to imitate what it's like to live in the wild for these birds. You know, and it's such a difficult thing to do, and I don't think that it even can be done. So,
yeah. I see some comments in the chat. Faith, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
So watching this, it definitely played with my emotions a lot. So what I mostly got out of it was that there's not enough education, there's not enough knowledge around pet birds, and there's not enough knowledge around parrots and just the level of care and dedication that is required to that is required not to own one, because the requirements of owning one are so little. Literally anyone can own a parrot legally, but the requirements of being a good owner, once you own, and this is just my opinion, once you own an animal, you are responsible for making sure that they have a good life for however long that they're with you. And in order to do that, you need a lot more education than what's currently available for most people thinking about buying a parrot.
Yeah, I mean, most people will go into a pet store, put down their money, they'll get handed a bird, a cage, a bag of food, and that's their education. That's definitely not enough. I see there's been some talk in the chat. Huge commitment. Yes, Chelsea, I agree with that. Jezebel, go ahead.
I think the story that stood out to me the most was Loon's, because he was left behind for like 3 to 4 days without any food, and I just felt bad for him because they left behind because they didn't have the financial needs. That's what it said according to the documentary.
Yeah. People do that with all kinds of animals, unfortunately. Fiona, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's extremely important and necessary that everyone, and mostly people that want to purchase a bird or even breeders, should watch this video and, of course, learn more about birds and their needs and how much they're going to need to offer to the bird before even thinking about it. They should watch this video. Absolutely. Because I think it would change a lot of minds and really help the whole issue of overpopulation, because it also amazed me how quickly, like you were saying even before we watched the video, but how quickly these animal sanctuaries were filled up. Like they basically opened up, and they'll probably be open for like a week, and then they have to say, no, we can't accept any more birds. They'll fill up so quickly. Like that man with a pottery owning business, like
Mhm.
he already had, like he said he had 300 birds in his house, and I was amazed, just in his little house. And then he had to switch to another place, and then a whole facility. So it was quite crazy.
Yeah, yeah. And Michaela made the comment in the chat about how the animal will likely outlive you. That is absolutely true for a lot of these birds. Anybody else want to chime in? Yeah, it's the bond that you have, or the bond that a parrot has with a person is the same kind of bond it would have with a mate. So it's different than the way you feel about the bird, or the way you might feel about your dog or cat. Kristen, go ahead.
I thought it was really interesting how throughout time, the people who were breeding these birds eventually started to see the shift in the popularity and then went into rescue. I thought that was very touching because they knew what the species needed and they acted upon that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice that people are able to do repopulation work with a lot of these birds. Unfortunately, we can't take the parrots that are in sanctuaries and train them to be wild birds and release them. The things they need to learn are much more complicated than the things that most birds need to learn. Okay, so it looks like you guys got exactly what I was hoping you would get out of that video. I know you're not used to taking a class on a type of animal and having the instructor tell you these animals shouldn't be pets. But in my opinion, parrots basically should not be kept as pets. It's, you know, I don't like to create rules about pet ownership, but there are some animals that really should not be pets. Parrots is one. Big cats, people shouldn't have lions and tigers. Poisonous snakes, people shouldn't have poisonous snakes. Bears, oh God, absolutely. Fiona, I see your hands up again.
Yeah, I liked when that man said, you can dress it up, you can put it in a pet store, but no matter what you do to it, it's never going to be a pet. You can't really call it a pet. I liked when he said that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Okay. Any other comments before we move on? Yep. Birds are not domesticated like dogs and cats are. Absolutely. Haley, your Nana's neighbor has a big cat.
I don't know. A long time ago when I was little, I saw a big, huge, it looked like a panther. I don't think so.
Okay.
but it looked like a big black cat.
It was black though?
It was big. It doesn't look like a pet. It was very huge.
That's really unusual in captive situations.
Yeah. Also, Fagin's story was sad.
Yeah. Yep. A lot of the stories in there were sad.
Yes, and I wish they went back to Fagin's story to see how he was doing.
That would be nice.
Yes.
Okay. Let me just check the chat. It does take a very motivated person to care for a parrot. Absolutely. And I see your message, Taylor. I got that. Thanks. All right. Wow, you guys did a great job on the fish here. Okay, so unfortunately, I'm going to have to erase all of this and we're going to move on. Okay. Announcements. There are a couple of things due this weekend, Sunday, March 13th. They're both reviews, so they cover material up through last week, both a quiz and a short answer question, or a series of short answer questions. Project topic requests, we're getting closer to when those are due. They're due March 27th before midnight. And spring break is next week. Yay! So you have nothing to do for this class over spring break. I want you guys to take a break and, just relax. Do something fun instead of coming to bird class. Maybe go bird watching. Okay, so when we last met, we were talking about the process of hand rearing baby birds. Oh, there's only a review quiz on Blackboard. Okay. I tell you what then. Since I didn't get it posted, we just won't do one. So the quiz that's up there will be due on Sunday, but there won't be any short answer questions this week. Okay. So when we're talking about hand rearing baby birds, parrots and pigeons have a crop. Hawks do as well, but we don't generally see those as pets. So when we talk about parrots and pigeons, the crop, you should recall, is a sac in the throat that stores food that is slowly digested. So it's a way for these animals to eat a lot of food when it's available and then go somewhere and digest and preen or whatever, but that way they don't have to eat as frequently as things like the songbirds do. With these babies, they do not have to be fed as often. You can fill the crop and let them digest. So you're only filling them, depending on the age and the size of the bird, at most once an hour instead of every 15 minutes. Larger birds can last longer. Older birds can last longer as well. And you can see this macaw is being hand fed. There is a tube sticking off the end of this modified syringe that goes down into the crop to put the food directly in the crop. Now, you have to be careful with this. You can overfill a crop, and that causes a condition called sour crop. So if you fill it too full and the bird can't empty the crop in a reasonable amount of time, bacteria or fungi will start to grow in the food supply. So sour crop is a bacterial or fungal infection of the crop due to food being there too long. And you guys remember how often we have to feed the songbirds can be as often as every 15 minutes. Generally, when you start feeding the baby birds, you use a liquid diet, you use a syringe. They get very used to seeing that syringe. They open up, you put food in their mouth, and they swallow. Nestlings will respond to activity near the nest by gaping. When they're very, very young and they haven't learned what their parents look like, anything that comes by, they're going to open their mouth and say, feed me, feed me. Once they get a little bit older, and if they're not used to people, instead of opening their mouths to be fed, they scrunch down and hold very, very still, hoping you don't notice them. So if you want to start with hand rearing or even sharing the food, the feeding with the bird's parents, you got to start them young. Pigeons and parrots. Parrots will open their beak. Pigeons will not, but they can be trained to open their beak because pigeons feed differently. And I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this when we talked about pigeons earlier. Instead of the parent sticking the food in the baby's mouth, the baby sticks their food in the parent's mouth. I'm sorry, the baby sticks their beak in the parent's mouth to get that crop milk, the food that the parent is producing inside of its own crop. Okay, screenshot. All right. So I'm going to skip this slide. We'll talk more about breeding birds for release when we talk about wildlife rehabilitation. But I wanted to talk about if you find a baby bird. I know the weather's still very cold up there, but starting in April or May, it starts to be baby bird season. So this is a flow chart to make you decide what needs to be done. Is the bird visibly injured or was it bitten by a cat? It doesn't matter if you see wounds on it or not. Bacteria in the cat's mouth can be deadly for baby birds, and it just takes a teeny little puncture in the skin for the bacteria to get in. So if the bird was captured by a cat or was visibly injured, you need to contact a licensed wildlife rehabilitator. You can do an internet search. They are licensed by the Department of Fish and Game or Fish and Wildlife or a variation on that name. And each state is going to have their own lists. If it's not injured, what you do depends on what it looks like. If the eyes aren't open yet, or it's clearly a nestling, the eyes are open, but there aren't very many feathers and it can't stand up very well. If you can see the nest, return the bird to the nest. If you can reach the nest. If it's a nestling, you can make a nest from like a basket and wire it firmly to a tree. Depending on the parent's species, though, you need to kind of keep an eye on things. If it's a nestling, the parents will find it. If it's a hatchling, some species of birds don't, they go to the nest location and assume the babies are going to be there and they won't look elsewhere. As the babies get older, then the parents will start looking elsewhere. But it's not true for all birds, but you do want to make sure that the parents find the baby if it's a hatchling and you had to make an artificial nest. If it's a fledgling, short tail, gape flanges. If it's in immediate danger, you can move it. Move it anywhere within about a block and it'll be fine. If it's not in immediate danger, leave it alone. Please leave it alone. Birds that go into wildlife rehabilitation generally don't do as well after they're released as baby birds that are raised by their own parents. It's better to leave fledglings where they are. And of course, the funny part of it is, does it have sharp teeth, large claw on the second toe? Then you've got a dromaeosaur. Has it seen you? No. Back away slowly. Yes, run. I love this. Watch for the others that may attack from the sides. All right. So this is a very, very important slide. So even though I don't have any writing on it, if you take screenshots, please do that. So Rosalie, you had a baby bird fly inside and mom wasn't happy. Yeah, mom's not going to be happy with that. And some of them will be pretty aggressive if you handle the baby, but they won't abandon the baby if you handle it, as long as it's warm. All right. So parrots. Generally, with this part of the lecture, I'm talking about the large parrots. So I'm talking about cockatoos, Amazon parrots, African greys, and macaws. These are the ones that are commonly found in the pet trade. Cockatoos can live for 50 to 70 years. Amazon parrots, up to 50 years. African greys, 40 to 60 years. And macaws, 80 to 100 years. Generally speaking, these birds primarily eat plants. but they will include insects and occasionally or sometimes meat in their diet. And there's a lot of variability. Faith, I see your hands up. Go ahead.
So this is just a testament to how long this is just a testament to how long these birds live, particularly African grays. So there's this story. So President Andrew Jackson, when he was in office, had a pet African gray, and he absolutely loved that bird. But knowing Andrew Jackson, he was incredibly vulgar. And so the bird had a tendency to scream profanities. And so the bird ended up outliving Jackson. And when Jackson died, the bird was brought to his funeral to say goodbye. But the bird had to be removed from the funeral because it would not stop swearing. True story.
Yes, yes. A lot of people who get parrots think it's funny to teach them to swear, and then it's not funny after a while. Okay, so I do want you to, which bird eats meat sometimes? Pretty much any parrot will on occasion. There is one species of parrot in New Zealand that is strict. Well, I don't know about strictly, but they are primarily a meat eater. We're not really going to talk about those though.
Wait,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
wait,
I'm
we
sorry. The primarily plant eaters, insects, sometimes meat, is that referring to all parrots?
That is referring to most parrots, yes.
Okay, okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so go ahead and take a screenshot if you want. So parrots are in a group called Cetaciforms, and they are primarily a southern hemisphere and tropical area group of birds. So you can see there are parrots in parts of Mexico, the Caribbean, South America, Sub-Saharan Africa, India, Southeast Asia, these islands, Australia, and New Zealand. Not in Europe, not in the northern parts of Asia. There used to be a parrot that lived in what is now the United States, the Carolina parakeet, and it lived mostly in the southeastern US. We're going to talk a little bit, I think we're going to talk a little bit about that particular species. Yes, in a few more slides. These birds tend to be brightly colored and very personable. They will engage with people and interact with people in ways that we don't get from other types of pets. And a lot of them are capable of some degree of talking. But remember, this is how they live in the wild. They live in very large groups, and they travel for up to 50 miles a day. So they're long distance travelers. This is one of the things we cannot do in captivity. They are cavity nesters, so they nest in tree cavities. And the babies need lots of parental care. When we talk about wild macaws, a pair of adults can raise one chick a year. That's it. If one of the parents dies, the other one will abandon the chick because they cannot successfully raise it. And generally speaking, they lay 2 eggs. So the second egg is in case the first one doesn't hatch. If the first one hatches, the baby's doing fine. They will just ignore the second chick and let it die. These are baby macaws. Yes, this one's still a baby. The smallest one is 1 week old. The middle one is 30 days old. And this one is 2 months. Oh, Rebecca, you're breaking my heart there. Okay, so I'm going to go through several of the major groups or types of parrots and talk about some of the distinct characteristics of them. And we're going to start in New Zealand. So this bird, the New Zealand parrot called the kakapo. Kakapo, sorry. These are nocturnal, ground nesting birds. They are critically endangered because of introduced predators. Things like cats, ferrets, feral dogs or loose running dogs. The last time I updated my notes, there were 154 surviving kakapo. They have all been relocated to a few offshore islands that are free of rats and free of cats and these other ground predators. They are all getting at least some degree of care from people because there are so few of them and they are such a unique and interesting species. I mean, look at how chunky this parrot is on this guy's arm. They're chunky birds. Their nesting is monitored. They all have some form of identification on them. A lot of them are microchipped. They get weighed regularly to monitor their weight. One of the ways they weigh them is they have a scale out with some food near it. And when the bird comes and stands on the scale to get at the food, there's a scanner that reads the microchip and records the weight. So they don't have to be handled that way. A lot of the offspring are hand reared in captivity for future release. And as I said, they monitor the nest closely. Right now, it is breeding season for these guys. And they keep track of how many have laid eggs, how many of those eggs are infertile, how many have hatched, and so on and so forth. And you can find this information on the internet. You can also find, I'm pretty sure it was a kakapo that got on the actor Stephen Fry's head and attempted to mate with him. And it's on video. It's funny. Okay, so that's the kakapo. The other New Zealand bird I wanted to mention is the one that eats the most meat. So this is the Kia, and they are meat eaters. They will eat birds, cats, and sheep. These are incredibly intelligent. We think of parents as intelligent. Yes, sheep. Probably just baby sheep, not full-sized adults. We think of parrots as intelligent. These are intelligent for parrots. They manipulate their environment all the time. They're not afraid of people. And they'll eat. Are they kind of like cannibals? I don't think they tend to eat their own species. A lot of people hear this bird eats other birds and think cannibal, but remember, birds are thousands of different species, and a bird eating a different species of bird is no different from us eating a cow or a pig. So no, I would not call them cannibals. These are the ones that I mentioned that move traffic cones, and they have to build play structures for them when they're doing road construction. So they don't just take the traffic cones and move them around. Now getting to, you're not going to see those New Zealand parrots in the pet store, but they're so different from any of the other parrots. I just wanted to mention them. Now we're starting to see the kinds of birds you see in the pet store. Cockatoos. We generally think of cockatoos as white birds, but they come in a lot of different colors. These are Australian birds. They cause a lot of damage in Australia. They're very destructive. So they'll do things like take rubber off of windshield wipers. And if there are wires outside of a building, they'll sometimes chew on the wires and damage those. These are very, very high maintenance birds. Okay, we already know birds are high maintenance compared to a lot of pets. Cockatoos are the high maintenance birds. These need as much attention as a toddler for their entire life. Which, remember, is 50 to 70 years. And it's a toddler that bites or has the ability to bite and bite hard. When they find a person they like, they are very affectionate. They like to snuggle, but they are very prone to behavior problems because they need as much attention as a toddler for 50 to 70 years. Most people are not willing to put up with that amount of effort, especially for that time period. And they are very dusty. So the house is messier and they can cause allergies. In addition to that, these guys are smart enough to open most cage locks. Generally speaking, you may need a padlock to keep them in a cage. People who do dusty meaning messy, it's kind of like dandruff. just flakes of skin and feather that come off of them constantly. People who keep cockatoos well, they do close them in a cage at night, but they are out during the day. If you want a cockatoo, I don't recommend them, obviously. You need to be home all day, every day. This is not a bird you can leave at home while you go to work for 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day with the commute. All right, so that is our quick look at the cockatoos. So if you want a screenshot, go ahead. These are Amazon parrots. These come in a lot of different colors. Their colors are primarily on their face and head. The body is usually green. And there are lots and lots of different species with a large range of personality types. So some will be more affectionate than others. There's just a lot of diversity. These guys can become good talkers. They are often one-person birds. We saw this in the video I had you guys watch, where I forget the name of the one that Basil, yes. Basil is the one that attached himself to the husband, and the husband went on vacation and Basil did not respond well. These tend to be assertive and demanding. And they are prone to obesity. They're called perch potatoes. And here we go again. Amazon parrots are one of the more common species that you see available. So we have a good idea of their lifespan in captivity, which is between 20 or 30 years. But remember, the potential lifespan with good weight control is 50. Okay, so that's our quick glimpse of the Amazon parrots. So if you want the screenshot, here are our long-lived birds, macaws, 80 to 100 years. There are what are called mini macaws, which are smaller macaws that might only live to 40. In the wild, they may fly 60 miles a day. You cannot replicate that in a home. These are also very stubborn birds, and they will challenge the owner for dominance over and over and over again. And that beak is really strong. We're talking breaking fingers strong. They're not great talkers. They're beautiful birds, but really, really not a good choice. Okay, so those are my notes on on the macaws if you want a screenshot of those. All right, the African grays. One of the smartest birds. Or at least its intelligence has been well studied. So there was an African gray named Alex. I know I have a book about him somewhere, but I don't see it right now. So Alex was a African gray that was studied extensively to kind of try and understand the intelligence of birds. So Dr. Irene Pepperberg wanted to study animal intelligence. It's very difficult to study animal intelligence for a lot of reasons. One of which is it's hard to be objective. So you tend to get people on the extremes. One side will consciously or subconsciously think an animal is much smarter than it is, that it is like a miniature person in feathers. There's a lot of what's called anthropomorphizing, where people project onto the animal what they think that animal is thinking and feeling. And then on the other extreme, there are people who think that animals are basically not much different than a computer. You know, this stimulus causes that reaction, and it's just they just don't think there's a lot of intelligence there. So Dr. Pepperberg decided she was going to work with African grays because African grays are excellent talkers. And she thought she could actually train the bird to communicate with her. And she was very careful how she set up her experiments. First off, yes, Faith, thank you. We have a hard time even defining intelligence. What does it really mean? That's a good point there. Okay, so she went into a pet store. She had the clerk pick out a bird. So she didn't even pick Alex as the bird she was going to work with. And she used a technique with Alex to play on jealousy. So she would have one of her students in the room and she would say something like, "What color?" And the student would go, "Red." And Dr. Pepperberg would reward the student. They would hand it some food. And so Alex would observe this and started copying that. So Alex was eventually taught bigger, smaller, same, different. Yep, 7 colors. 5 shapes, triangles, squares, circles, over 50 objects, and over 100 words. So you could show him a toy truck and he would identify it as a truck. You could show him a truck in the parking lot and he could identify it as a truck. He would communicate his wants. So if he wanted a specific food, he would ask for it. So if you rewarded him with a peanut and he wanted a banana, he could tell you he wanted a banana instead. He could communicate when he wants to go somewhere, communicate when he wanted a scratch. He could do simple math and understood concepts that a lot of very young children don't, like 0 or none. It's hard to, the absence of something is hard for children to learn when they're little. He could figure out optical illusions, and he understood the idea of object permanence. So if you've ever played with a kid and you've got an object in your hand, oops, didn't mean to turn that on, and you hide it from them, they don't always realize that the object is still there. That's something that kids learn, I forget exactly what age, but Alex was able to learn that. He knew how to apologize. He was estimated to have the intelligence of a 4-year-old. But the emotional maturity of a 2-year-old. So they actually can understand the words they're saying. They're not just copying. You can train them to understand their words. But because of their intelligence, they need lots of diverse mental stimulus. Otherwise, they get bored. And you don't want a bored parrot. We know that from the video. Questions on these guys? Comments on these guys? So I know that I'm just kind of touching on the different groups. I think that what you guys saw in the video was more important and informative than anything I have to say. Okay. I do want to talk briefly about the Carolina parakeet. So this is a taxidermied Carolina parakeet. They used to be common. Look, they went up into New York State, all the way out to Colorado, parts of Texas, all through this whole portion of the United States. Used to. And there were millions of them. They were about the size of a conure. You can see they had brightly colored faces. They've got that classic parrot bill. They lived in flocks of around 200 to 300. So just like the parrots we have today. Last known Carolina parakeet, oops, died in 1918 in captivity. I think her name was Martha. We drove them to extinction due to hunting and habitat destruction. They were considered a pest species because they would land in a field of grain and eat the field, right? They're eating people's food. They were very bonded to their flock mates. So if you shot one bird, others would come back to the injured and dying bird. Instead of taking off and fleeing to protect themselves, they went back to their injured friend, which allowed, of course, a massacre. All right, how's everybody doing? Got any questions or comments on parrots? Okay, looks like we're good. So I know we just kind of briefly touched on parrots in this lecture. But I think that what's more important to talk about, well, besides the video, which is very, very important, I wanted to talk about bird intelligence. We already started talking about it when we talked about African greys and Alex. When we think about birds and look at birds, if we look at a mammal's brain, we see all of these ridges on the surface. And those ridges in mammal brains are very, very important because most of your brain cells, your neurons, are on the surface of the brain, and those folds provide more surface area for more neurons. Birds' brains look very different. They're smooth on the surface and their neurons are distributed. This makes it tricky. If we look at a mammalian brain, a brain from some mammal that's not human, we can see the different parts of the brain, and they're going to do similar things to what the corresponding part of our brain is going to do. So smell is often up front. The larger this part of the brain is, this olfactory part, you know they smell, their sense of smell is better. We can identify back here in the back where vision occurs. And again, the size of that gives you an idea of how dependent that mammal is on vision. We can't do that with birds because we don't really know what the different parts of birds' brains do. We can see an olfactory bulb, a smelling bulb, and a vision area. But beyond that, it's very, very different. So, intelligence. What is it? Faith, go ahead.
I feel like a very bare bones definition of intelligence would be not exactly knowledge of something, but the ability to acquire higher knowledge of complex concepts. For example, when you talk about parrots being intelligent, how do you know they're intelligent? They can say words that we recognize, but they have no idea what those words mean. They're not saying it with an intent. They're just saying those words because that's what they've been taught.
Some of them seem to understand the words.
Yeah, but like most of them will,
Most of them don't, yes.
most of them will just speak because that's what they've been taught to do. Even like the apes that have been studied and taught sign language, they're using a human communication system that was taught to them, not one that they would have naturally developed on their own. But because they were able to use that system, they're considered incredibly intelligent. So for me, intelligence is less about knowledge and more about the ability to acquire knowledge.
Okay. Anybody else have a definition? You're all happy with that definition? Okay. Oh, great. Turns out that was pretty good for you guys. I would like to add problem solving. Hi, Guy and Mary's house. Communicating, learning by observation. I think all of these things are important with intelligence. When we study animals, is instinct a sign of intelligence? No? Can you migrate to Central America without a GPS? Birds do it. Birds, a lot of species do it without any training. Yeah, it's not in our instincts. Yeah. So when we look at mammals, mammalian intelligence can be estimated by two things. I mentioned one, the folds on the surface. But also the size of the brain compared to body size. So not just the total size, but the size compared to the body size. Rats are considered pretty smart. They have a large brain compared to their body size. But as I mentioned, birds' brains don't have folds. However, the size of their brain relative to their body size is still highly variable between different groups of birds. And we can use that to compare intelligence between different types of birds. So in general, running out of space to type. In general, bird brains are larger for their body size than mammals. And within the birds, the corvids and the parrots have the big brains. We know what parrots are. That's what we've been talking about. What are corvids? Does anyone know? Crows. Yes, crows, ravens, and blue jays. Exactly right. Good job, guys. Okay. So I'm gonna erase this so I can type some new stuff. Fiona, I'm not sure I understand your question.
I put it up in the chat, a little more of like adding on to that. But do you think that we should be measuring intelligence the same as we do in birds as humans? If that makes any sense, I worded that weird. Like, could the brain
I know
size
what you mean.
Okay, could the brain size be like, could it mean something different than it does in humans?
Absolutely. Absolutely, it could. However, the fact that the birds that display traits like learning and problem solving have bigger brains for their body size strongly suggests that bigger brains do mean more intelligence in birds, just like in mammals. Okay, I'm getting ready to clear this. So if you want that screenshot. All right. So corvids and parrots, smart. Retites, not so much. And they tend to have very small brains for their body size. The ostrich brain is the same size as its eyeball. Intelligence testing is difficult because different species have different ways of understanding the world, which is relevant to their lifestyle. So dogs, for instance, understand pointing. You point to something and a dog will look. Chimpanzees don't understand that. Chimpanzees don't point to things with each other. Dogs learn because they've learned to understand pointing because we've domesticated them for so long. These are our earliest domesticated species, and they've really evolved, and through selective breeding, we've gotten them so that they instinctively understand that. What we do know is birds, as well as mammals, with higher intelligence tend to spend longer with their parents. They're learning from their parents. A human-raised hummingbird does fine. They don't have to do a lot of problem solving. They can live on their instincts without a lot of problems. But a human-raised raven will not usually make it in the wild. When I was doing wildlife rehabilitation, one year we got a baby raven in. And this was out here in California. And the vet called up and down the state of California looking for a rehabber that had a raven because you can't raise one baby raven. We found somebody that had an adult raven that had been injured. And so we brought that adult raven to our facility so that the baby raven could learn from the adult raven. And then we released them together back at the adult raven's habitat. The adult raven ended up in rehab longer than it needed to be, but the baby raven needed that. Okay. Jeez. I'm going to have to stop there. We'll talk a little bit more about intelligence after spring break. Anything you want me to go over again before we take off for the break?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's the difference? What's the differences between ravens and crows?
The difference between ravens and crows, well, they're different species. Ravens are larger.
Okay.
They eat slightly different things. Ravens are smarter than crows, but they don't form large flocks the way crows do. So there's a lot of small differences there.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have a good weekend and quick break.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.